All right, we're going to call this meeting of the Library Board of Trustees to order, and we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance, as always. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Can we call the roll, please?
I will yell.
Okay.
Trustee Gagani. Here. Trustee Humphreys will not be in attendance tonight. Trustee Kuntia. Here. Trustee Sladak. Here. Trustee Williams.
Here.
President Topic.
Here. Before we go to the consent agenda, I just want to explain why we're here on Tuesday and not on a Wednesday, and also why we're here and not Village Hall. I had to work court appearance on Thursday out of town, so I have to fly out tomorrow, so I was not able to make it tomorrow, so people were kind enough to reschedule, and then Trustee Humphreys had something come up and he couldn't be here. So thank you to the Park District for use of the space. The Village Hall was not available this evening. So with that, we can move on to the consent agenda.
I will move to approve the consent agenda. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Can we, do we call roll? I'm screwed this up every time. Do we call the roll on this? I think we
It's
do.
finances, so.
Okay, let's call the roll. Thank you.
Trustee Gagani.
Yes.
Trustee Kuntia.
Yes.
Trustee Sladak.
Yes.
Trustee Williams.
Yes.
President Topic.
Yes. That moves us on to public comment. I think, is this the space down here? And there should be a microphone. So as always, no more than 5 minutes. Please try to keep it to 3 if you can. Keep things civil and direct your comments to us, and we look forward to hearing your comments.
Good evening. My name's Eileen Brainer, and I am a resident. I'd like to address the library accessibility issue primarily addressed by the remodel of the first floor. First of all should understand that the library is not out of compliance with the ADA requirements in its current configuration. The changes required for ADA compliance are digital changes, not physical changes. Everything regarding the entrances to the library for handicapped access are about convenience and aesthetics. I would again like to propose some simple parking changes that will improve the convenience of handicapped accessibility without a huge price tag. We have 2 entrances to the library, a north and a south entrance. I've never thought of either as the front entrance. There are 2 handicap parking spaces near the canopy of the south entrance. This is clearly the closest entrance from parking space to canopy cover. This should be the preferred handicap parking area, and 3 spaces could be provided here. This would immediately improve the convenience and accessibility for handicapped patrons. There's a 15-minute parking space on Forest, right where the ramp down from the parking lot turns to go into the lower north entrance. Making this space into handicap parking would cut off 42 feet of ramp travel into the building. On the north side of the library, there are 3 handicap spaces and 2 15-minute parking spaces. With the addition of south and west side handicap parking spaces, the north side could be dropped to 2 handicap spaces and an additional 15-minute parking space to replace the one taken away from on Forest Street. This is very inexpensive improvement to the accessibility of the library taking advantage of the proximity of parking to the south entrance canopy. This will require some cooperation with the village, but it should be easily navigated. Think about this as you contemplate the cost of over $3 million for the architectural changes that have been proposed. Remember, you are the fiduciaries of the taxpayer. Access to the library received 18 of 72 votes in polling at the Downers Grove Public Library retreat. A nursing station received 14 of 17 votes. There were 0 requests from patrons in 2023 and 2024 for a nursing station, yet this is in the architectural plans. In the Rethinking Libraries paperwork, page 101, 48 people said stay out of social services. 18 were pro-library social services, and 6 said collaborate with the village. That's 52 against 18 for a library social worker. I simply still do not understand the prioritizing of a social worker. Moving to the second floor of the remodel, I'd hate to see the wonderful light that streams in from the big, beautiful windows in the northwest corner. With that light blocked off, the south side of the building will become dreary on that second floor. Please consider all this in your deliberations on this remodel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Debbie Anderson Phillips, and I'm here tonight representing EQDG, Equality Downers Grove. And we're here to thank the library and the incredible staff for their collaboration and support for our recent One Book, One Town initiative. We chose This Is How It Always Is by Lloyd Frankel this year with the support, again, and help with the library staff. It was a beautiful book that touched on an ordinary family dealing with raising a transgender child. Clearly, this was of interest to people in our community, as we had over 200 people attend our events for One Book, One Town, including the 2 events at the library. The library worked diligently to have a questionnaire and a bookmark in the books when people check them out. I believe something like 26 books were checked out just from the library. So we really value our collaboration with the library, and with over 200 people in our community attending and getting a lot out of this event, clearly there was an interest for this topic in our community. And the other great thing about it is that people that didn't want to check out the book and didn't want to come to our activities didn't need to. So it was a win for everybody. But thank you for the library for all your collaboration and help.
Thank you.
Good evening, Hillary Dank, 433 Wilson Street. I just wanted to acknowledge the collaboration of 2 historically significant organizations here in Downers Grove, the League of Women Builders and AAUW, and thank the library for your collaboration with these organizations. I want to specifically acknowledge that on Equal Pay Day and also during Women's History Month. You guys have always been willing and interested in collaborating on really interesting and important educational events and programs, and I just wanted to thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other comments? Okay. Then we will move on to trustee comments. Anyone want to start us off?
All right, I just wanted to say thank you to the Downers Grove Public Library for their amazing partnership with EQDG. EQDG is one of the many organizations that has a long-standing partnership with the library, and these collaborations really help leverage the library's impact on our community. These partnerships closely align with the library's strategic goals, which focus on creating a welcoming space for everyone to discover, grow, play, and learn. I recently attended one of the One Book, One Town events, and it was absolutely fantastic. I met a lot of people, and being surrounded by such a positive group of people was really inspiring. The library's commitment to fostering inclusivity and community engagement is evident in their diverse programming and events, and EQDG has been a valuable partner in this effort. Thanks again to the library staff and EQDG for all their hard work in making these events happen, and it's clear that partnerships like this make a real difference in the community.
Good evening, everybody. I have two topics. The first is about a book that's getting some publicity, and really more generally about how the library treats the books that some people may view as controversial. And then my second topic is Briner's favorite topic, which is library safety. So you may have heard that there's a book called My Body Is Growing, and some people feel like it's inappropriate to be at the library. I'm not going to talk about that in detail. We'll say the title is sort of the story of my life since the pandemic. Gained a few pounds. The library will review a challenge if there is a formal challenge to the book through our normal process. So that's all I want to say and reassure the public about on that specific book. But it touches on a more general theme. And I have a few remarks about the alleged presence of inappropriate books at our public library. I'm compelled to address this broader context because a small segment of the public should not impugn the integrity of our library staff. A series of cases defining what books are protected speech under the First Amendment, and then obscene or pornographic material. Libraries and book publishers are knowledgeable about these laws. They know what is and is not porn. I know it when I see it is not our current legal standard. Sorry, Justice Potter. The court would evaluate alleged obscene or pornographic material based on the context of the entire book. In this case, one element the court would assess is whether the book is purely appealing for children when taken as a whole. And that last part's the key point. In contrast, if you create a poster with images from a book, that poster would be assessed for whether it is obscene without looking at the broader context. Thus, counterintuitively, a book could be not obscene, but the display of certain images from that book on a poster could in fact be obscene. Our library supports the ALA's freedom to read statement. Under those principles, our library does include some books in which certain community members, but not others, view the book as being age inappropriate due to, say, cartoonish-like images. Such books are typically selected for their overall artistic or educational value, and many community members want to access those books for those reasons. The last thing I'll say is, one of the things that I admire about my fellow trustees is that they are no nonsense, and we will continue to be. I'd like to address library safety next, since that was specifically raised in the public comments last month. It's also something I have been looking into. So this is library safety and our incident reports. I recently had a conversation with a retired police officer who worked in the greater Chicago area. He gave me a few insights into how to assess library safety risk. In light of that conversation, first I would like more data from library staff, and they know that. More data would be helpful to both the public and the trustees. And secondly, I've asked library staff to create a one-page bulletin in the form of an infographic that provides the key data. I think that type of communication device would be effective for our community. So we're going to work on that starting tomorrow. And they're super excited. At least by email, they seem. Okay. Yeah, I'm not trying to micromanage them, but this is being raised as a community concern, and so I'd like to address that concern. When I think about safety risk, I'm reminded of a story from my own life. Around 10 years ago, I moved from one neighborhood of Chicago to another. I don't know how you feel about Chicago, but mixed feelings amongst our community here in the suburbs. The new neighborhood, Printers Row, was part of the South Loop, which had, at the time, a reputation for modest levels of criminal activity. I looked at police reports of incidents in the area, and at first glance, the incidents were alarming. Any single incident seems alarming when you think of it, this could happen to me, right? I called the Chicago Police Department and spoke to an officer. The officer made a keen observation that I think has some broader applicability. He noted that the crime incidents were higher in part due to population density in my new neighborhood compared to my prior. When you assess safety risk, you need to think about it in terms of a rate. The denominator matters. Many people raised this point during the COVID pandemic. Contraction and death rates needed to be contextualized in terms of rates. Similarly, when we look at library safety, we need to consider incident rates. The denominator is both measurable and unmeasurable. We now track the number of visitors. While we're unable to measure the number of human interactions at the library, we know that that's significantly larger than the number of visitors. At least we hope so. Like COVID, where one death was a tragedy, any illegal or unsafe behavior at the library is concerning. I agree with Ed on that point. We need to know why those situations occur, how the library handles them, and how we can reduce the likelihood of similar incidents. That's what I want to investigate. But like COVID, we need to be mindful of the denominator, and that denominator is large. If the denominator matters in one context, it should matter in another. I have some preliminary 2023 and 2024 data to share with you. First, let me define a few terms. Illegal and prohibited incidences include a range of activities that vary in severity: theft, graffiti, littering, interfering with someone's comfort and safety. And that one typically is a situation where someone is standing too close to another person for too long. Lewd conduct, violent or threatening statements, open possession of a controlled substance, which I know from seeing each of these incident reports is quite a rare one. Stalking and trespassing. Trespassing does occur when someone is banned and then comes back. Other incident types include emergencies, health-related concerns, and so on, disruptive and unsafe activities. These include noise complaints, not following directions from staff, patron complaints, injury, for example, kids might bump their heads in the kids' room or fall off of a chair. Those are common occurrences, apparently, I'm told, by staff. Fire alarm or weather-related closures, power or internet outage, non-emergency or items left in the library, panhandling, soliciting, proselytizing, etc. Wide variety of things are covered by just an incident. With that in mind, here are some preliminary findings. Total incidents declined year over year by 21% from 233 to 183. Incidents related to illegal or prohibited activities declined year over year by 33% from 49 to 33. The total number of visitors slightly increased year over year by 4%, meaning more people were using our library and our library services in 24 compared to 23. On average, that equated to 8,400 visitors per week in 2024. On average, the library had 3.5 incidents per week in 2024. On average, the library had 0.6 illegal or prohibited instances per week in 2024, meaning fewer than one such incident occurred each week. I like this statistic. On average, last year, a person would have needed to spend 11 consecutive days at the library from open to close to be at the library at the same time as a single illegal or prohibited incident. And you'd have to be at the part of the library where it occurs to even encounter that illegal incident. So unless you clone yourself, not likely. Hopefully, Julie did not require any library staff to stay on site for that full duration. Bottom line, overall, our public library is very safe. A recent anecdote is exemplary. I'm close to done. You'll like this one. A creepy old man encountered a group of 6th grade girls on Main Street. He attempted to lure the girls to join him and his AA buddies to Tivoli bowling alley. One of the girls then called her mom, who told the girls to go to the library. The scared girls retreated to the library. Library staff called 911 and calmed the girls. Downers Grove Police Department investigated the situation, arrested the old man, and took him into custody. The library banned the old man from the library and asked the police to treat him as his trespasser. Here, the incident, the recorded as a library incident in our system, increasing those statistics, occurred outside of the library. Our library was the safe haven. A mother wanted her kid and her kid's friends to seek refuge at the library. The kids were under the watchful eye of responsible adults. Our library staff appropriately handled the situation. But this is just one story. It's not the whole book. We need data-driven analysis. We need to consider the frequency and severity of incidences over time and in terms of the total number of library visitors, a rate. Eventually, we will analyze more robust data than the preliminary data that I just summarized. In the meantime, it is irresponsible to tell residents that the library is unsafe based on a few cherry-picked incidents from our incident reports. Thank you.
Maybe I shouldn't have handed it to you first. So that story that Nathan just told happened to me several years ago with my younger daughter, who was with her friends at the Main Street station. They went to Every Day's a Sunday. They walked across the street and wanted to have their ice cream at the fountain, and a strange man approached them. She sent me a text and said, "Mom, this guy is kind of weird. He's following us around a little bit." They kept kind of moving around, and I said, "Go to the library." And that's what they did. They hung out in the children's section. We didn't call the police in that situation. He kind of followed them and wandered off. But that is a common story. I've talked to so many mothers who have done the same thing, or caregivers. So thank you for telling that story, because it happened to me in my own family. Bringing up the book really quick, you know, when my kids were little, basically up until they're about 11, I went with them to the library. I helped them pick out their books. There are resources out there for us to look up and say, like, what's this book about? Unbiased resources. We can say, like, what's this book about? Who's the protagonist? Who is it targeting? What are some images? When they were really little, I flipped through the books myself. My 3-year-old never went to the library by themselves and checked out a book. And when they got a little bit older and they would bring books home, I would still, like, let me look at this. I think that that's a parent's responsibility or a caregiver's responsibility, what your child is checking out, what your family deems is appropriate for your family. So that's all I wanted to say about that. And I'm really excited to look at the collection policy again. We looked at it last month. There's been work done to it, and I'm really proud of some of the changes that have been made, especially to local authors and local interest. Trustee Williams had sent in some suggestions, and they were really great, and I'm excited for us to be able to kind of make things really clear, so that there's no gray areas anymore. So that's all.
You knew I would talk sooner or later. One of the things that has come up about public safety, you know, in the course of a number of conversations, is the staff training. Are they trained to deal with whatever the contingencies might be? Fire, tornado, potential criminal activity, even active shooter. The answer is yes. They do go through all kinds of public safety training, and that is why when this particular incident came up, they knew exactly what to do, where to take these girls, who to contact to get quick action from the police department on top of 911. So there is ongoing safety and security training of the entire staff. Someone had raised the issue of active shooter training, and I was intrigued by that, and I did a little bit of digging myself, being someone who was raised by a gun collector father, a big Second Amendment proponent. Not everybody agrees on everything. Active shooter training is designed for closed environments with a small number of people that may turn over from day to day. It can work in a bank where you have an in-place staff and, you know, 1 or 2 lines of people that you might have to help get out of the way or something if something happens. It's much less effective, if effective at all, in an open environment where there is a constant stream of people coming in and out, staff, public, patrons, where not everybody is always going to be there that has the training, where there's a lot of movement going on. It's harder in a case like that to actually do more than try to get people to safety, which is the basis of most active shooter drills anyway. But I did want to reassure you all that when that came up, I did take a look at it and in what circumstances that could be effective. And schools, for example, it can be a public library with the kind of traffic we get and the multiple entrances and all that, not quite so much. But we are taking all of these suggestions seriously.
Thank you. I'll just have a few things. There have been comments about a potential book challenge. I'm not going to get into that other than to say no challenge has been submitted. We have a process for that. In fact, last month we talked about changes to that process. If there's a challenge, we will go through the process. I have great faith in the process, and I'm just going to leave it at that at this point. 2 other things. You'll probably notice on the agenda, item 8B is library director search. That is because Director Milovec was kind enough to give us a lot of advance notice that she will be retiring. So there will be many, many thank yous, I'm sure, to follow. But I just want to take a moment to just thank you for all the great work that you have done. And I'm sure we'll continue to talk about all that. The last thing I wanted to note was, there has been things going on with the Social Security office. I believe you can no longer call the Social Security office. You have to go onto the website, and there have been issues and problems with that. We've made announcements about this, but I do want to let everybody know that library staff, including our social work interns, are available to help people with that process. So if you are having challenges dealing with the Social Security office, you need help getting onto their website or creating accounts or things like that, you can do that. You can call the library. I think, am I correct? You would call and make an appointment. People probably should just show up for that. Is that right?
You can drop in if the social work intern is available. The hours are on our Facebook page that the social workers are available.
Thank you. So I wanted everyone to know that I think that's very consistent with what we, as a library, try to do for people. So with that, that's the end of my comments, and I think we can then move on to library director's report and business office department presentation.
I just decided it was easier if I just head over here. All right. I do just want to say thank you to the Park District. They were fantastic in our last minute meeting change and giving us this space to have the meeting. Also, if you didn't see it online or anywhere else, I did announce my retirement effective March 2nd, 2026. And that gives the board plenty of time to start their director search, and gives me plenty of time to plan all of my vacations for 2026. Because, you know, working really gets in the way of my travel. So I just wanted to very quickly go over a couple of things from the financial reports. Nathan Williams had asked a couple of questions when the board packet came out. I provided answers to his questions to the entire board, but just in case anybody else saw it. In the special legal line of our budget, it was year-to-date 30% of the budget was spent, and that is from 2 invoices with our attorney. One invoice covered the end of 2024, and that included the potential village referendum and board governance questions. And then there was a separate invoice for the beginning of 2025 that covered the collection management policy review and 1 FOIA request that we had a question about. The next one was the personnel recruitment line, where we have only budgeted $1,000 for 2025, but that is specifically for background checks and job ads. An executive search firm would actually come from the professional services line. And then data processing services is showing us 85% spent. That is due to an inadvertent charge to that line, the Biblioteca maintenance contract, which you might remember from January. That is our automated materials handling system, all of the self-checks, all of the RFID pads. It covers a lot of stuff. Anyway, it was budgeted in the other equipment repair and maintenance line, but was inadvertently charged to data processing services. We have requested the correction with the village finance office, and we do anticipate that that will be done for your next round, so you'll see that correction come through in the next financial report. And data processing services, by the way, is primarily our SWAN fees for our catalog system, so that's what data processing services is. We did have an individual who has been very vocal on social media about request for the review of library resources. However, we have contacted this person 4 times to put those concerns in writing, and they have yet to do so. But Allison has prepared a response based on the phone call we received from the individual that we can send directly to them. And then just a couple other things. A lot of folks have heard about the Institute for Museum and Library Services being eliminated at the federal level. This is the only federal agency that provides funding for libraries, and it all goes through the state library. It's about 10% of the Illinois State Library's budget, and then it funnels through the state library to libraries individually in the form of per capita grants and partially funding those. Those are also part of the state's budget, so all this gets kind of commingled. And then also funds that go to the rails are reaching across Illinois library system that provides things like delivery. They get you your books from other libraries. That's how they come to us. And through rails, grants that help support SWAN, which is our cataloging consortia. So as you can see, there are a lot of layers to this, and each organization has its own financial situation as well. Rails maintains a 24-month operating reserve. SWAN maintains a 7-month operating reserve. So as you can see, it will take a while to figure out and really see how elimination of those funds might impact our library directly or indirectly. And just two more things. Congratulations to our Assistant Director, Jen Rieneski, for earning her ADA Coordinator certification. She took on that training earlier this year and has started doing brand new audits of the building for ADA accessibility. And she has been working very closely with our Building Operations Director, Ian Noor, on that. And without further ado, I'm going to hand this over to Caitlin Babalitis, our Business Office Manager, to talk to you a little bit about what the Business Office does in the library.
Try to move that so I would just cry. Probably better. I'm getting over a cold, so apologies for my voice. Thank you for the opportunity for me to come and give a little more insight into the workings of the business office. We are a small but mighty department of 3, with myself as the business office manager, Scott Anderson as our business office coordinator, and as of last month, Emily McInerney as our part-time business office assistant. Again, I want to thank you for including the ability to hire a part-time assistant in the budget for this year. She has already made a world of a difference and is a wonderful addition to our team. So the majority of our work is done behind the scenes, but it is incredibly important work that helps keep the library running. Much of our jobs involve tracking, analyzing, and maintaining information. So we love a good spreadsheet in the business office, but I recognize that the only thing drier than a spreadsheet is someone droning on about a spreadsheet. So I promise I will keep this as concise as possible. Our 2 main areas of focus are finance and human resources. On the finance side, you see the results of some of that work each month here at the board meetings. We oversee all of the money that comes in and out of the library. All invoices come to our department and are entered into the village's Munis financial software by Emily, and then they are double-checked and verified by Scott and myself, and then sent off to the village for eventual payment. Our party trick in the business office is that if you point to an invoice, we can most likely rattle off the entire budget code string for that particular charge. So as you can imagine, we do not get invited to many parties. But we are proud of that ability, so take that for what you will. We send out the checks and electronic payments once a month, usually the day after the board meeting. We work closely with the village's financial department on our accounts payable, accounts receivable, payroll, and grants management tasks. When the library receives a grant, we track and monitor the use of the grant money to ensure the money is spent correctly and within the given time frames. The business office also handles all of the money that physically comes into the library. So we balance and reconcile the cash register, manage all of the cash and coin boxes for the printers, copiers, book sale shelf. And then we reconcile all of the credit card charges, both from the physical card terminals that are at some of the desks and the self-checkouts, as well as online credit card payments. We prepare the weekly bank deposits and bring them to village staff, who then handle that part of the financial process for us. And then as we prepare the monthly revenue, expenditure, and invoice reports, we analyze them for discrepancies like Julie just spoke about, any abnormalities, and research, report on, and correct the issues when needed. Payroll is another area where we put in a lot of our time. We manage payroll bi-weekly for all 108 staff members. This entails reviewing and processing each timesheet, tracking and managing each staff member's pay time off, accruals, and usage, and monitoring the payroll reports to ensure staff are keeping to their budgeted hours and not going over hours that would put them at risk of reaching the IMRF or insurance thresholds. We have about 2 to 3 spreadsheets to track all of that information, and these staff timesheets are created and used in Google Sheets as well. So as the business office manager, I am also the human resources rep for our library staff. This means I am involved in our hiring processes, our separation processes, and any changes to a staff member's role that are made during their employment. So I review and post all of the job ads when we have openings, and I consult on job offers and connect with new hires prior to their start date to run their background checks and complete the necessary paperwork. When we hire a new staff member, I also meet with them twice for orientations as well. When a staff member leaves the library, I meet with them for exit interviews and complete all of the back-end paperwork. And the business office team together manages the personnel files and records for all staff, which requires us to track information in multiple places and in multiple ways. So we are frequently updating staff records and making sure the most current information is listed in all of the many necessary locations. I'm also a resource for staff when they have questions or need assistance with employment issues, such as leaves of absence and workers' compensation claims, which we do not have many of, thankfully. I hold benefits orientations for staff who are eligible, and I walk staff through the enrollment process when needed. The village's Human Resources Department oversees our benefits program, but I provide staff with explanations on the benefits, and I am an available resource for staff if they have questions. So outside of finance and human resources, the business office handles some other popular services that the library offers. We oversee the public bookings of the large meeting room on the first floor of the library. Emily and Scott both work with members of the community and assist them in renting the room for their meetings. This process involves a lot of work with our patrons and our staff, as we frequently have to juggle room requests from the community with library events and internal bookings. Last year, the meeting room had about 530 bookings, with around 220 of them as public bookings and 310 as library events and internal bookings. So it can create quite a scheduling puzzle at times. We also manage the library's notary services in the business office. 12 years ago, when I transferred into the admin office, my position was the only notary on staff. The popularity of the service grew to the point where I could no longer do the rest of my job. And the number of notary requests coming in were too great for one person to handle. So I have built the notary program up over time. We now have 10 notaries on staff, soon to be 12. And last year we completed 471 notarizations. The service continues strong this year. We've already completed over 100 notarizations since the first of the year. I also created a training program for our notaries, as up until last year, the state did not require any training to become a notary. You just filled out the application, paid for your stamp and certificate, and that was it. The state of Illinois now requires that anyone applying to be a notary must watch a webinar during that process, but I still continue to train all of our notaries with my program as well, as it's a little more detailed and catered towards what the library does. The business office manages the library's document retention requirements, following the state's rules on what documents we need to keep for different amounts of time. This is something we maintain at all times, and once a year we request approval from the state to discard items that no longer need to be retained. Emily, Scott, and I are about to undertake a project this year that will involve auditing our document retention requirements and requesting an update to our list of rules from the state, both by adding some new document types on there and removing some documents that the library no longer has. Our list of requirements has not been updated since 2013, so we are overdue for a refresh. Along with the previously mentioned tasks, we also complete annual reports for state and local organizations. We assist Julie and Jen with Freedom of Information Act requests when needed. We manage the annual training for all staff, and we keep our policy manual and employee handbook up to date. I spend time keeping up on employment law changes and best practices to ensure that we are compliant and are remaining a competitive employer. For example, last year we adjusted our paid time off practices to comply with the Paid Leave for All Workers Act, so that our substitute staff and paid interns now earn 1 hour of paid leave for every 40 hours worked. At the end of 2024, I attended a few webinars to ensure that we are compliant with the pay transparency amendment to the Illinois Equal Pay Act that went into effect January 1st of this year. And last, but certainly not least, I also assist the Downers Grove Public Library Foundation with some of their bookkeeping, as well as managing the Garden Walk Brick Program. I communicate with patrons who have purchased a brick to finalize their inscriptions. I place the orders with the engraver and oversee installation of the bricks when they are completed. I absolutely love being a part of this process and hearing all of the wonderful tributes and memories that go along with the bricks. And it really is so rewarding to hear how many lives the library has touched and to see so many people wanting to make the library a permanent part of their family's history and story. So I'm going to end my presentation on that positive note, and thank you so much for the opportunity to speak about our little department. And if you have any questions, I am happy to answer them. Yeah.
Thank you. Do we have any questions?
Yeah, I was just thinking about the Pay Transparency Act.
Yes.
If we do a national search, we'll have to be careful about compliance with not just Illinois law, but also
Correct.
other state laws.
Yes.
And typically, these acts, I work with executive compensation consulting, so we actually publish client updates on this. We would have to disclose a pay range associated with the position.
Right.
And obviously that could be market competitive or it could be not market competitive. Generally, companies are putting pretty broad ranges
Yes.
on that. So it really depends on the experience of the individual applying.
Right.
So it probably wouldn't be prohibitive, but it would be sort of mindful external optics. And I mean, in the sort of corporate space, obviously, it sort of signals to your competitors what your pay rates are. This is less of a concern in that respect, but it is something that we'll have to be mindful of.
Yes, absolutely.
Do we have any other questions for Caitlin? Caitlin, thank you very much for the
Thank you.
excellent presentation.
Thanks so much.
Okay, our next item is resolution appointing two of our trustees to the ad hoc committee of the Downers Grove Village Council regarding alternative ways potentially of selecting members of this body. So I'll just give a little bit of context maybe, and then we can see if people have any questions or comments before we vote on this. There's a whole long history of how we got to this point. I have no intention of revisiting that history from up here, but we did want to sort of make that clear for the historical record in the resolution itself. So because we were sort of looking at things that happened in the 90s in the course of this discussion, and so I thought it was just important for the benefit of people in the 2040s and 2050s that they could see exactly kind of how we got to where we got to. And I guess the other point was, that I wanted it to be clear that this is a committee of the village council. It has sort of been informally styled as a joint committee, but this is, as an entity, this is not a committee of the library board. It's a committee or subcommittee of the village council. So yeah, I wanted that to be sort of clear for everyone. And then we'll be voting on appointing Barnelli and Nathan to participate in the committee. That work has started already. I'm hoping maybe they can give us a little bit of an update on the first meeting while we're on the subject. But with that, I will open it up to other comments.
I'll move we adopt the resolution.
Okay.
I will second.
All right. We have a motion and a second. Can we call the roll on the resolution 2025-1?
Yes. Trustee Gagnon?
Yes.
Trustee Kuntia?
Yes.
Trustee Sladak?
Yes.
Trustee Williams?
Yes?
President Topic?
Yes. Resolution passes. Before we move on, is there any quick update you want to give us?
We decided Nathan would do the talking.
You're gonna be sick of hearing from me by the end of the night. All right, so we had an ad hoc committee meeting on March 13th. I'll provide an update on that meeting. Again, it was the first committee meeting, and it's the committee meeting of the council, created by the council. At a high level, we discuss items covering the council's resolution, including the committee's objectives, such as the research process and whether to hire an expert. Ultimately, we're going to have a summary report, so we discuss the nature of that. We discuss next steps and committee procedures. Go into a little bit of those items. Each of us was given an opening statement. I distributed my opening statement to the rest of the trustees, so they have a chance to read it if they like. I provided context for the creation of the committee, similar to what Matt was just referencing. And I described some of our concerns about the resolution itself. That shouldn't have been a surprise to the ad hoc committee members from the council, or the council overall, given that we had articulated that in advance by email. I thought overall it was a positive meeting. We nudged the work in the right direction. We, being the two of us in particular. Oh, one more thing, Commissioner Sadowski Fugitive, give you the proper respect. She's in the audience, so thank you for attending. Commissioner Tully has talked about having a liaison, so you're sort of functioning like that right now, in an informal sense, and we all appreciate you. So we nudged the work in the right direction. Let me give some examples. We will research the pros and cons of the election and appointment processes. I think there are different parts of the resolution that could have been interpreted inconsistently with one another, so we got that clarification. I don't think that was a huge surprise, but helpful to get confirmation on that. And then in identifying the pros and cons of the appointment process, we will acknowledge where a con could be remedied by changes in the current process. You may recall from the February joint meeting, there's a lot of talk back and forth about whether the council would be ceding power if it was more than fact-finding, whether the council would be ceding power if we discussed the current appointment process as part of the work of the ad hoc committee. So I get it on some level that if we talk about the current appointment process or the current removal process, the two of us would be subject to that removal process. So it kind of seems like a conflict of interest if we're telling them what criteria they should have as it relates to us. So, but Matt said at that joint meeting, a high-level discussion, meaning here's a current con associated with the way things work today under the appointment process, but just acknowledging that you could correct that by being more transparent. You could correct that by having open hearings where you do the interviews, or by having an open hearing where you talk about and vote on a specific appointment. There's various things that they could do that could address community concerns that could have been put in the con bucket of this sort of analytical framework. And it may be, but then we're going to have that context there, that there's going to be some sort of acknowledgement that that is correctable. So I thought that was appropriate. Library and billing staff will conduct the initial research. They've already started that into these issues, including the legal processes for changing the current governance structure, trends and prevalence data. And that research is going on over sort of a 3-week period in advance of our next meeting. And then the next meeting is tentatively scheduled for early April. Someone's unhappy about that because that overlaps with spring break. So we'll see. And then we had a discussion of whether we should hire an expert or not. I think many of us here, from my private conversations, are strong components of hiring experts. I mentioned the Northwestern law professor that both Matt and I had, President Topic and I have spoken with, and Commissioner Tully wanted to look for others. I sent an email to him and Leslie asking as a courtesy that if they do find someone else, I'd like to speak to that person before we have a public discussion about it. Because if they find someone else, obviously anyone could cherry pick. And I don't think Matt cherry picked. I think he found someone within his sort of general network, and the fact that the Chicago Public Schools had a debate around this issue. Maybe this particular professor was reported in the news. I don't know the source, but the point is that certainly at least I was not selecting him for a particular bias. And I'm not saying Commissioner Tully would do so, but I think we all have to sort of check one another and make sure that we do hire appropriate experts. And be interested in other people's perspective on that, because that is an open discussion point for the next meeting. Few last points before I let you ask me questions. Commissioner Tully reframed the issue as a question to be answered rather than a problem to be solved. It's nice framing. The council does not appear interested in identifying the problems that we're seeking to solve. I find that troubling. Eventually, that conversation needs to happen. It may happen at the point that the council sees the report, and they do with their report whatever they choose to do with their report. But I made it very clear in my opening statement that you have to tie any decision making to the problems we're trying to solve, or else you may take a maximalistic approach. It won't be narrowly tailored to solve that problem. The last thing is we revised the quorum. This was a bit more benign. We revised the quorum requirement to set it at 4 people. It was initially 3. That allows for Renali and I to conspire with one another. That allows for any 2 ad hoc committee members to talk to one another outside of an open meeting. So that can happen. That's all I have, but would be interested in everyone else's perspective on an expert, the timing as to when we hire an expert, what an expert should be doing, and really sort of how this research should be consolidated. Whether we should be taking public testimony.
I went to the meeting as a member of the audience. One of the things that struck me, if I've got this right, and maybe you can clarify, if I heard it correctly, the result of this is going to be a report on the pros and cons of assorted methods of trustee selection, be that current method approved, elected, appointed, or if somebody comes up with something else brilliant. But the report is only a report, it's not going to make a recommendation, is that what I heard?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, that's correct. It's a fact-finding process, and that was by design and in the resolution that the council approved. So, and what that means is that we're going to look at the attributes. I think that was Commissioner Tully's favorite term. The attributes of. Sorry, I guess for the camera is probably a good idea. So we're going to look at that. So it is a fact-finding mission. That's the limit of the scope. No recommendations. And that was, at least from my interpretation of the February 3rd joint meeting, pretty much the consensus view amongst the council members across their political spectrum, frankly, except for an exception of one person who was vocally opposed to that and wanted recommendations. But what that really means is that we're going to show the pros and cons of the current appointment process, the pros and cons of an election process through the current legal means, and potentially the pros and cons of a hybrid approach, which is something that Commissioner Tully seems to have an understanding of, or sort of a specific framework for that he likes. He has not tipped us off on what that exactly is, so we're going to have to investigate. And I don't think it's pros and cons of modified appointment process. They ruled that out. So I was able to get the concession that when we are evaluating the pros and cons of the current appointment process, we will note any changes that they could make that would address the cons, but they're not going to separately analyze sort of a hypothetical modified approach and then separately have pros and cons of that. So really there's just sort of three buckets: current process, election process, hybrid process. Does that answer?
So I have a question. So where, if at all, would an option of having an appointed process, but with some sort of a public, like the name of the candidate being released and the opportunity for the public to comment on that before an appointment is made? So is that an option that is being considered?
Telephone. That is not an option being considered by the ad hoc committee. But once we have a report with fact findings, yeah, we got two.
I appreciate that problem solving.
Brilliant. The insights of staff members. So that option may be considered by the council and weighed by the council. I think the concern of the council, at least as I heard it, was that when they look at a modified appointment process, they have to consider how that would impact. We are sui generis. We are a thing unto ourselves. But they also have these other boards and commissions. And they have sort of their process and their policies around how those are appointed. And so they don't want to have sort of in a vacuum suggested change to the current process and weighing the merits at an ad hoc committee level when they really should be having that discussion at the council level. And Commissioner Tully, in my conversations with him and at one of the council meetings, said what they should do right after the election, once the new and the incumbent members of the council are elected, that they will have a governance committee meeting amongst the council. That's what he proposes, and that's what apparently they did while he was mayor, so that they can discuss issues such as this. So it may come to be that they discuss that in that context, but they are not going to make that within the scope of this ad hoc committee of the council. And I do find that to be problematic, but one of the things I emphasized during the committee meeting was that the scope was already defined by the council's resolution. That the scope of our work was constrained before I even had negotiations with the two council members who were appointed to the ad hoc committee because we had to adhere to, and they may need to go back to the full council to get an interpretation of their own resolution, but their own resolution really defines what we're doing.
And that was a conversation we had, that maybe they do need to go back and look at their resolution.
And they obviously could change the scope at any time. It could be iterative, or to the extent that they do think some of our points of view resonate, they could change, sort of modify their own resolution such that they could address these kind of things. But until they do, in the absence of them doing, the scope is limited and does not allow for what you just suggested.
Okay. All right, thanks for explaining that. No, I was just thanking you for explaining that.
Okay, sorry.
No.
It's a long-winded, but I'm tired. So.
Not at all. Not at all. Do we have any other questions on this subject? Okay. Well, we've already passed the resolution. I appreciate the updates. We'll just sort of have a standing agenda item then to kind of have you update us. And thank you both very much for participating in this. I recognize that this is no small time commitment, and everyone has other things to be doing. So I'm sure everyone would join me in thanking you very much for agreeing to this subject.
The last thing I'll say is this was something that Matt mentioned in the sort of back and forth before the whole thing was created. The intent is to meet roughly every 2 weeks. That's not going to happen given certain people's vacation schedules and given the new quorum requirement. but that it is going to be a significant time commitment nonetheless. And it's unfortunate that that time commitment overlaps with our library director search, which we knew about and they didn't know about, because it could theoretically overextend the two of us. But thankfully I'm coming to my slower period at work. So like April 15th, and you might not see me tired. So who knows? I'm also kind of the newbie, so I got like that new trustee energy.
You're really on a roll tonight. Well, thank you, and I go ahead, keep laughing, that's fine. All right, well, thank you, and yeah, 2 weeks does seem like a lot, and as you mentioned, we do have other business we do all need to attend to, so I'm going to move us on, last call on this. Okay, well that segues nicely to our next item, which is a discussion about library director search. Which will be a process taking place over the next period of months. Julie, do you want to maybe just give us sort of an overview of what you think the process should look like, maybe stake out what some of the big, the mile markers a little bit on timing, just so we can kind of get started a little bit on that?
Yeah, the first...
Why don't we get you a microphone, is that okay?
One of the first things that will really need to be discussed by you is whether you're going to do this as a committee of the whole or as a subcommittee. There are many different ways of doing it. Hiring an executive search firm is likely to be one of the first tasks. There are numerous firms in the Chicagoland area, national, regional, and more local to libraries, and various libraries around us have used all sorts of different folks. So once you go through the process of selecting a search firm, then the group, whichever committee you're full, will work with that executive search firm on things like making sure the job description is right, making sure the job ad is right, talking about where are we going to publish that ad, things of that nature, and then going through the process of publishing it. Generally, your executive search firm, you decide how involved you want to be in like the first round of vetting, all of the resumes, etc. There is usually a first round of interviews. Very often, especially if you're doing a national search, those will be virtual. And then as you decide on finalists, it's usually at least 2 rounds. You'll also have to decide in the process where and how you want to invite staff input, and whether or not you want to have, do you want staff to be coming to your committee of the whole meetings or your committee meetings and participating in the process. One of the things that we do internally is that whenever we hire for a manager position, we have at least a group of the department staff interview that person. The entire management team, or as many of them as we can get together, interview that person, as well as their interview with administration. So you may choose to do a similar kind of process, utilizing staff groups from the library, the management team, and yourselves. And then once you make an offer, once this group decides and you decide what kind of offer you're making, and the executive search firm will help you through all of that. Once that is put in place, then you are also at the subject to whatever that individual's current situation is. And in some cases, folks have to give a more significant amount of leave, particularly in cases where if you have a library director who has a contract, they may be contractually obligated to give a longer lead time. I was in that situation when I came to this position and actually had to give 90 days notice. And so that will really affect that start date. In the meantime, our wonderful assistant director, Jen Rieski, is more than capable of keeping the ship afloat and headed in the right direction, should that process take longer than expected. So kind of working backwards, it really depends on what your target date for hiring. So if you really want to try to have someone in for March of 2026, you're probably going to need a good 6 to 9 months of lead time for that process. Some of it also depends, as you all have talked about, on your availability and to have the meetings to get through the process. Because again, this is going to be in addition to your regular board meetings and trying to keep up the business of the library. So yeah, it's going to take some time for all of you. Not so much for me.
Thank you for that. Do we have questions for Julie about the process? It's getting real.
It sounds to me like our first steps are to decide on whether this is committee of the whole or if we're going to have some designees, and to immediately start looking for the experts. We do believe in hiring experts, an executive search firm, library director search firm, whatever that turns out to be. Because that in itself, we're going to have to do some RFPs and interview some people. So I want to make sure that we're all on the same page, that those are the two immediate things.
And you don't necessarily have to do a formal RFP process. You can actually do an RFQ, request for qualifications, and actually just put out, and we post that on our website. There's some different library journals and publications we can put that in. And we can also directly solicit in firms that we know of, that you all might want to work with. Some examples, Isaacson Miller is a large national search firm that like ALA used to hire their director. Oak Park Public Library just went through a process with Koya Partners, which is again another large national search firm. We've got some more kind of this region of the country, sort of more library focused, folks like June Garcia and Bradbury Miller. Bradbury Miller is, by the way, who the last board, Dave was the only one here the last time we did this, so that this board worked with. And then you have some smaller that are really just more Illinois focused, like Dieters and Todd and Stacks Consulting. So
So
There's
we need to
all
back up
different
and-
kinds.
and decide, before we even go into hiring a search firm, how broad a search are we gonna do?
I was going to say there are a couple other questions I think we should start thinking about now. One is whether we want to do a national search, which is what you were just hinting at, or whether we want to do a narrower search. And then secondly, how are we going to involve resident input and how are we going to involve staff input? And from my perspective, particularly the staff input is essential, both from an employee retention and engagement perspective. So we want to be thoughtful about how we want to do that. And
Maybe
maybe,
search firms can give some guidance on that too.
right, well, and also if you have a search firm that specializes in sort of library searches, that they're more likely than a more generalized search firm. Again, in executive consulting, people need to hire their CEOs. So, there's some very big search firms that I'm aware of that probably don't sort of do this area. The other thing I wanted to say, so one, it would be helpful to just get a list of all of the sort of major search firms. So maybe send that to the full board. The other thing I wanted to say was, well, a question. Where we found a local candidate, could they be subject to a non-compete agreement? Okay.
Not in public agencies generally.
Okay, I didn't know this. I'm a novice.
That's a corporate thing.
I know. It could have gone away, but administration changed.
The courts are tending to disfavor those more and more now. Anyway,
Yeah,
so
that's-
it's probably not a can of worms we would
Right.
open up.
But we're not in California where they're unenforceable across the board. So,
Would it make sense to go ahead and do an RFQ and just see what comes back? I mean, there's no real cost associated with that, Julie, right? Okay. Anyone object to having staff put that out? And then next month, you could report back on what came in, and then any other, ones you've worked with in the past, or let's just maybe have that be the list, and then maybe we can start maybe even finish the discussion next month about selecting a search firm. Does that seem like a good goal?
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah.
Which means that we would, at least for the time being, be operating as a committee of a whole.
Right.
Okay.
Does anyone have feelings on that question? I feel like I'm constantly looking this way, I might be missing you. Okay, thank you.
You're being ignored.
That's
So-
totally fine.
I guess I would just have one observation. It would be more efficient to have a search committee, but I think the whole board is going to be interested in this.
Well, there's nothing that says we couldn't create a subcommittee if we decide that's necessary for a particular function. I'm just saying for right now, for at least getting the process going and the search firm involved. Maybe this is not the time to think.
Yeah.
I also think, since he's not here, Dave has sort of a long-term institutional knowledge so his presence is helpful in that respect.
And I think whether we do it as a committee of a whole or a subcommittee, maybe it makes sense for one of us to become sort of a point person or some, right? So maybe we can talk about that next time as well. And then Julie, I think it'd be helpful to just sort of, starting with the end date, getting some of those, maybe give us a report next time that sort of says, here's where you should be at the different stages.
Some of that will depend on the search firm you select and how wide you want to cast your net. So that's.
Got it. But I think we would very,
Yeah.
am I right? Like, we would want to have a decision made while you are still here with us. and if it turns out that person needs to give more notice, then we'll go into a transition period in the meantime. But we shouldn't lose you and not yet know who. So starting from that and then making some assumptions about, well, how far in advance, and I don't know how the holiday timing or things work out with the scheduling too. It may be that the decision of whether to do a national search in part might be based on, well, that's going to add additional months that maybe we don't want to add. I don't have a feeling one way or the other about that. But.
Yeah, I can give you a general
Okay.
timeline.
Okay.
And then my recollection was that it's not common practice for two library directors to serve at the same time. So the transition is just, there's a moment in time where there's no sort of integration into.
Right.
And so with that said, there is integration with the sort of remaining staff, which is one of the reasons why I think staff should be involved in this process.
Right.
I don't think any of us disagree. I think that's.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking that I was in a contentious situation. I've been in those recently, and I can tell the difference.
So RFQ and timeline, yeah.
Yes. I had one other thing. Public input. I think, we're going to be discussing this on a regular basis, so the floor is open if people have input, on that or, on any of these subjects. So I'm sure we'll get public input along the way.
I do think there's some merit to looking nationally. I think the difference in perspective might actually be helpful to the library, even at you think about hiring head coaches for football teams or whatever. In that context, this is how I would implement an offense kind of thing. The process might actually give us some insight, even if we end up with a local candidate.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense to me.
I agree. I think it's in our interest to at least reach those tentacles out initially. There's a lot of churning going on in library world right now for a whole lot of reasons.
But with that said,
and with that said, where there's chaos, there's also opportunity. So we don't know who might be out there who would suit our needs, and we need to at least put the feelers out.
I would like to have some understanding as to what would be the cost difference between sort of a local hire and out-of-state hire, say. Whether you pay relocation packages, what's the pay structure when it's a national search.
Yeah, I think if it's possible, Julie, to get into that a little bit next month, include, with the search fees, how they differ, and all those kinds of things, that'd be good. Not to pile on, but. Okay, anything else on this? This is just a discussion item, obviously, so nothing to. Okay. I think, my computer went to sleep, I think next up is the selection policy. Yes? Okay. So, Marty, you want to kind of walk us through a little bit?
We have been working for the past, really including staff, several months on updating the collection policy, which is it's the heart and soul of old line library stuff. What do we retain for the library? What do we keep? What do we get rid of? There are some other things involved in it also in terms of how our donations to the library handled, whether that's cash or someone's massive book collection or piece of real estate or whatever. So it's quite involved. Matt had asked me to take a look at it in my capacity as secretary. The staff had already been working on it, making some necessary changes from the old policy. And we did a whole Google Docs thing where a whole bunch of people weighed in, and it's all been synced at this point. The bulk of the work is in section 4, which is the description of the policy, the purpose of the policy, why do we have it? That language has been clarified and updated. The introduction to the collection policy has been clarified, updated, some language tweaking. There's a section, 4.2, which really kind of discusses the role of both the staff and the board when there are controversies over materials for the library. That was a little bit fuzzy before. It's been tightened down. Now we know exactly who does what, who's accountable at what stage. If there's, for example, a book challenge. The gut of the whole thing is section 4.4, which is the actual selection policy. That has also been pretty much completely overhauled to add additional criteria, to find some terms that weren't well defined before, to make it clearer the distinctions between how we handle general materials and special materials, which have a whole separate process. The entire section on donations was overhauled by our attorneys. We didn't have a lot to do with that, but they have to do that periodically when there have been changes in the tax codes and real estate codes and so forth. The section 4.7 discusses what happens when someone does challenge something in the library. They want it pulled, or they want us to put something in that our staff has decided is not appropriate for whatever reasons on the list of criteria. That also has been clarified, tightened up. The appeals process is described in much more detail, with much more consistency on who does what at what points. There's a new form, someone alluded to earlier, so that if we are to get involved in a big review process, we have something in writing from the person who is saying, here's why this is a problem, or here's why this should be in the library, and here's how I think you're violating your own policy if you don't do this. So I think it complicates it a little bit, but it's also clearer at the back end if we're having to make all of these decisions. And there's been a lot of work go into this by a lot of people. I think Cindy was particularly involved in this in her communications and editing capacity. But I think we've got something that's a viable document. It's never going to be perfect. These are, decisions that human beings make, and some other human beings may decide that that's not the best decision. But we do now have a more comprehensive approach to the collection management policy.
Thank you. Thanks for summarizing, and thanks for taking the lead on this extremely important issue. Do people have any questions?
Comments, not questions.
Either way.
First, thank you. Marty, staff, equity advisory team, all for your work. Despite the fact that there are a lot of cooks, I think that we do have a cohesive document. Also really pleased that we had a red line version. Now we have an incremental red line version compared to the previous version. A lot of transparency for the public to see what is changing. And I was happy with the final work product. So I definitely appreciate the thoughtful approach to finalizing the document. Thank you so much. And I support it.
Any other comments or questions? Okay. Someone want to move for adoption of the, sorry, I want to get the exact, collection management policy, thank you.
I'll make a motion to approve the collection management policy.
I'll second.
Okay, can we call the roll?
Trustee Gagani?
Yes.
Trustee Kuntia?
Yes.
Trustee Slater?
Yes.
Trustee Trustee Williams.
Yes.
President Toppich.
Yes. Okay, resolution passes. Thank you to everyone who put in a lot of hard work, and to those in the public who gave us some feedback along the way, so thank you.
And it'll all be on the website soon.
Okay, very
The
good.
transparency page?
Okay, we do not have an executive session this evening. This concludes the agenda, and I will now adjourn the meeting. Thank you.